Goes up.
Click on it and bring it out.
Yeah, I did.
Welcome back.
Did you say audio's up?
They can hear you.
All right. Well, Shabbat Shalom, y'all. It's good to be here with you today. Thanks for joining with us. And you can see we've got a pretty good crowd here this morning. Pam had to leave early today, but we, the local group, are going to have a movie matinee today, a Saturday matinee, and John and Lyndon are sponsoring that. Brought the popcorn. How much is it for if you get like just a regular bucket, is it?
$10, just like the movie.
What do you think, huh?
1 shekel. You can smell popcorn for a nickel.
So we intend to go for about 30 minutes today, and then we're gonna have to let you go because we have what's the movie we're watching? Ben-Hur?
It's a remake of Ben-Hur.
Okay.
With all modern characters, and I previewed it, and I don't know any of them.
Oh, really?
Any of the actors. They're all young.
Okay. So this movie could be really good, or it may not be, huh?
Guy.
What African guy?
Ben Kingsley?
Ben Kingsley.
Is he in it?
He's in it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Good makeup job.
So, and now look, we would love to have everybody with us, but that's not legal, I don't think, that you would stream a video from here. Plus, we couldn't get the money for it.
Hollywood be up.
No, I'm joking.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do, I think you know everyone. You know Sherry, and we have Jerry, and we have Dave, and John, and Lyndon, and Jodelle is here with her back to the camera so no one knows she's hanging out with this group.
Witness protection.
Witness protection plan.
Although the hair's kind of a good giveaway.
And Lydia.
So what do you, and Lydia's here, yeah, she's really high. That's why I didn't bring her up, because she was, no, I'm joking.
I just have to leave.
Yeah, she's being very polite, and so think about all the things that we covered today, and what would you think, what really jumps out at you today? Did anything kind of stand out in the class, or did it cause you to think differently, or confirm what you already believe? And I'm talking to those online as well.
Yeah, I think I shared with you that it confirmed some of the things that had been on my heart and mind since last week's teaching, where you brought up Kadosh,
Yeah.
a holy people, and how this transition for me out of, charismatic Christianity into a more Torah, biblically oriented faith, that I all of a sudden I learned, it's not a sin to drink alcohol. It's not, all these things I've been thinking was a sin, like I was this freedom, and now I find with this looking further into a holy people set apart, that there is a reason to have a separation, to not be like the other nations, like the people around me, maybe that I associate with or have friendships with, that maybe are not even Christian or following Torah, some don't even believe in God, but that there should be a distinction and a separateness, like it's okay to be free, but within the confines of your heart being like, is this going to set me apart for you? So when you confirmed what I had been looking at, like, well, what is it? I've been doing this Torah walk, what seemed right in my own eyes.
Yeah.
Now I'm finding I need to focus more. So that was a real confirmation that Jehovah was answering my heart there.
I think a lot of people, too, take that phrase, everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And what they do is they say, people will say, well, you're not following standard forms of X faith, so you're doing what's right in your own eyes. That's not what I'm doing. No, it's not what, because that's the way some people, if you don't follow this defined form of biblical faith, then you're doing what's right in your own eyes. Whereas what I would suggest is that it's not at all that. What we who seek to follow the Torah based on the written word, What we are attempting to do is to discern from the plain reading of the text what it says and live our lives accordingly, and that's not doing what's right in your own eyes. You get the point? Right. So people are trying to put that on, those who follow the text and say, well, you're not following God's way. But we get examples like we covered today in Isaiah where people who are sort of following a way of man or the commandments of men, that tends to put one dangerously on that edge of, and think today, by the way, in Deuteronomy 13:1, it says very clearly, don't add to. If you want to guard God's way, the way you do that is not add to or take away. That's guarding. And that's clearly defined in Deuteronomy 4:1 and 2 and Deuteronomy 13. Don't add to, don't take away, and thereby guard, which is one of the requirements. If you listen, if you follow, and so forth. So,
one of our viewers here on YouTube says that we are like our idols if we follow them, blind and deaf. And so, in other words,
those two passages that I read today in Psalm 115 and Psalm 135 really make that point. In one of them, it says outright, if you follow these idols, you're like them. In another, it says, may they be like those, who. So if your gods are not real, your faith is not real. That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
You're following a false god, your faith is false. And that's one of the things that the prophets are very critical of, is this false religiosity, which today being the new moon on the Jewish calendar, the assigned reading, interestingly enough, is whenever Shabbat, the new moon falls on Shabbat on the Jewish calendar, Isaiah 66 is the reading. That's a strong condemnation on false religion there. And it really kind of gets you oriented towards, get your heart right.
Yes.
Because as it says in Isaiah 6, to this one will I look, to one who is humble and contrite and who trembles at my word. That's Isaiah 66. That's what God wants. Oh, that they had such a heart as this, that they would fear me always and keep my commandments.
Yeah. And you started out by bringing out the point of it being simple and easy. Your teaching ought to be simple and to the point. And I personally think that's, this is my opinion, that a lot of religions are complicated, and you don't have, you have to study them to understand them, and so on and so forth. Not that you shouldn't.
Yeah.
But simple and easy. Pretty much, it's black and white.
Yeah.
What you were saying.
And I think too, for so many of us that are on this journey, I think the hardest thing that we have to overcome when we begin a contextual, pashat meaning of the text, is you start seeing how all these hundreds of religions, the big religious sect, whether it's Baptist, Methodist, put a name to it, and it's not just Christianity, it's Judaism too.
Mm-hmm.
How can these well-defined, well-established, how can they not have it? How can they not, be it or be in that frame of righteousness where they're actually following what God actually says? And the more you study and the more you see, well, they don't follow this command, they don't follow this command, they rationalize this one away. I think that's the hardest step that you take, is that step out of the traditional boxes. And it is a leap of faith to walk on your own, to walk for yourself. And as you say, they say, oh, you're adding to the text. You're not following what it's really saying. But then you ask them, well, where am I not following? And, the conversation all of a sudden becomes very quiet and very uncomfortable because they can't show you. And then they'll try to rationalize this away. And then you're stuck saying, well, but the text says this. How do you? So you come back and you say, well, how do you explain this? And then all of a sudden, they don't like that accountability. So it is a process. And but yeah, I think that is a huge step, is holding yourself accountable to the text even though it separates you, from religious sects, from friends, family, but then trying to maintain those friendships and.
Yeah, and I think sometimes there are things like I'll read and I'll go, I'm not really sure what that means, or how would I do that, or how would I observe that. I mean, so if I get to those, then those things hadn't been revealed to me, is the way I look at it. If I understand it, you mentioned the Hebrew word pashat. The rabbinic authorities have identified in some of their writings 4 levels of interpretation, they call it. And they spell together, they take and form like an acronym, I guess. They would take the first letter of 4 Hebrew words, and together they spell pardes, which means paradise. And so those levels of interpretation, and I'll explain what they do with them, it's pashat, which is the simple. What does it say? Now, some people look at these as stair steps, like this is just the rock bottom. This is your basic model, Dave. This is what you and I believe. And that's nothing. Like, now, if you're holier, some people think of it like as you get smarter, then you go to remez, which is sort of an illusion. It's like it says one thing, but it alludes to another. And then you have darosh or darash, which means to thresh out, to dig, like you're getting deeper. And then sod, the mystery. So some believe that, like in Kabbalah and various mystical forms, you're at the highest level. Well, in some ways, I think some people who look at hints and allusions and who dig and get off course a little bit, and then they're into these mysterious, I think sometimes those get further and further away from the plain meaning.
I don't know. I think Madonna has it all figured out.
Yeah, Madonna's got it.
But that's the point I was making. The simple, easy solution is in problem with a lot of religions, not all of them, but I'm going to say all of them.
Yeah.
The term itself. So.
Yeah.
But the thing that I find, because you even have a sod interpretation in Christianity too. They may not call it that, but the mystery of the kingdom. Exactly. But what you find, and the one thing that they all have in common, is there is a lack of textual accountability. Every single one of those movements is able to rationalize away the actual doing, the physical doing, the physical obedience. It's only in a heavenly realm or a heavenly sphere, and then there's no personal culpability.
Yeah.
So, on that point, when I looked at Deuteronomy 12, which is in the Torah reading,
Yep.
This seems to me, in context, starting verse 1, these are the statutes and judgments which you shall observe to do in the land which Jehovah thy God, thy fathers giveth to thee to possess it all the days that you live upon the earth. And then it goes on to destroying the idols, how to bring your burnt offering sacrifices, tithes, how you're only supposed to eat. You may kill and eat flesh in your gates, but you should not eat the blood. And then you don't eat it in your own gates, but you eat it before Jehovah the God in the place where He shall choose. To me, that sounds like that's a specific.
It's very specific
for those people coming into the land in that place.
Yep.
So I can't really observe. I mean, I can't do that commandment, right?
Yeah, there are some commands which deal with specific groups of people and specific places and so forth. And this goes back to what can I do? Basically in principle, you can keep a lot of these, even in the diaspora. And this is one of the things that Judaism has sought to understand and sort out, is how do I do this when I'm in another place? Like
and
the
not
psalmist
add
said.
to or take away from the
Right.
That's
But
what I was getting at.
one of the things that Deuteronomy brings up that no one else brings up, I mean, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers don't bring this up. Exodus hints at it in Exodus 15, in the Song of the Sea, where it talks about, and I will bring them into this specific place. But The rest of the Torah doesn't really do this. I mean, you have the patriarchs, and it's nothing wrong with them building an altar wherever, right? But by the time you get to Deuteronomy, and the scholars pick up on this, its centrality of worship becomes very, very important. And so when Josiah, in Kings and 2 Kings 23, when the scroll is discovered, this becomes a big, big deal. How many times do we read in Kings and Chronicles, throughout the historical books, we call them, but yet he didn't do away with the high places, the Bamot. One of the things that Deuteronomy really stresses is centrality of worship, purity of worship, centrality of worship. No pagan, don't do like they did. You're going to do it differently, because I'm commanding you to do it differently. But one of the things that it does, beginning in chapter 12, the scholarly community looks at Deuteronomy 12 through 26 as a law code within the book of Deuteronomy. Up to chapter 12, it's different. You get to chapter 12 through 26, one of the things people falsely assumed based on a passage in Deuteronomy 17 is that Deuteronomy is a repetition of what we already know. In fact, deutero means second, and nomos means law. So they thought of it like a repetition of the law. What we really find is that between 12 and 26, we're introduced to 100 commandments, more than 100, that we've never read anywhere else. Deuteronomy's language, its phrases, its code of law is different. And you talk about, I know Barry was on earlier, and some of the things that he's researched, and the Nebo covenant and things of that nature. You do get this exposure to other laws. Now, I say all that to say there are instructions that are specific to the land, and it's clear when that's the case. But when they're differentiating between to the place that I'll put my name, that phrase, I forget how many times it's used.
That's what I was looking at too. Because there's the Shem that's in the valley. Well, Israel, and then
standard interpretation, the basic understanding is the place that God chooses, God doesn't even though there are texts that say that Jehovah dwells in Zion and so forth. In 1 Kings 8, Solomon says this, the heaven of heavens can't contain you. How much more this house? The house is not for God to live in. You knock on the door and he's in there. Yes, come in. It's not. It's a place of dedication for the name. It's where he places his name. So in biblical literature, this becomes synonymous with the place that you bring your offerings, the place that you offer your vows. You worship there at that place, and not all over the place. Now, a couple of times in this particular Torah reading where it's talking about you can eat this, the clean and the unclean can eat it. You're like, well, what does that mean? There's a differentiation between ritual slaughter and the eating of flesh in a normal, like if you're going to have a barbecue at your place. You don't have to follow the rules of ritual purity. That's okay. That's not what it's talking about. Just like you eat a deer, or, because he's saying, look, I know some of you good old boys in Louisiana hunt. Just like you do a deer or whatever, if you kill an animal, but notice he goes, but even there, you don't take the blood. You spill it out. That's like one form of the killing of an animal. The respect must be there. Now, that's one side. Now, if you go to the place where God chooses to put his name, now we're talking about something different. Now, when you bring your offerings and you do your sacrifices according to the text, you must follow these rules. The unclean can't do this, right? You can't access the zones of holiness. So it's kind of a long answer, but yeah, but Deuteronomy in particular begins to really define, make plain the teaching, and it kind of clearly shows that distinction. So.
And one question that was posed, I believe, by Lowe's, was how then do you observe the spilling of blood, where you don't eat blood with the flesh? Does that mean only eat kosher? What does that mean? And for me, and how I do it is I find when I buy kosher, our kosher place around here is the Cajun Kosher Deli in New Orleans. And when I bought meat there, it has had more fat, more blood than anything I would buy at Whole Foods or even the organic stuff that I get at Walmart. So for me, I find when I get like 90% fat-free, all that, there's very, very little blood, very little, Now, is it slaughtered properly? Well, maybe not, but then I take other measures to ensure that, I'll drain the blood when I'm cooking it or whatever. If it gets too dry, I'll add a little bit of olive oil. But so there's things you can do, if you eat meat.
You do your best to apply the principles of the Torah.
Not just having a rabbi on staff.
Right.
Well,
And that's too. This is 2018. For the last 20 years, in some sects of the country, the kosher symbol is just simply a marketing tool. It is just simply something that is paid for. It does not.
Symbol you talking about? That's my point.
Right. Well, it doesn't matter if it's the U or the A. It really doesn't matter. Because they'll even go in there and something can be processed with pork, and I've read stories on this by people that have actually been on the board where they say, well, they'll even sign off on that, and they're not careful with it. So
and certain groups only accept certain certifications. Yeah.
Right. So, but anyway, so yeah, it's it's something each of us has to try to find what works for our families, and what we're comfortable with.
So to your point, if a person eats meat, one of the key points in Torah portion A is that you respect the life. Mm-hmm. So this is something that I tend to encourage people to think about. It's like you're literally taking the life of a being, of something, So you shouldn't be disrespectful. And so what the Torah is pointing out is that you don't forget that. If you eat meat, you have that healthy respect for life, so that when someone kills an animal, if they're hunting or if they raise animals to slaughter, like my friend Jono raised goats for a long time, and he and the sons they would take care of this, but they understand the Torah. They're respectful about that. I think a lot of the people that I know who hunt for a living have that respect, But that's one of the key points. Now, here's something that is stressed in this Torah portion over and over, is the idea that you don't do the blood. You don't ingest the blood. And so I tell people, because I have friends that are Christians, and I tell them, this is a rule that applies even to you, whether you want it to or whether you think you're totally free. Hallelujah, thank God I'm free at last, free at last. Even so, Deuteronomy stresses it, but so does even in the Christian writings, the book of Acts. It's, there's this meeting in Jerusalem, and all these people come together, and they're talking about what do we put on these non-Israelites who are coming to the faith. What do we do? And one of them is don't eat the blood,
I know that from hunting and stuff in the past that hunters, especially in Louisiana and in the South, there are recipes where they actually do eat the blood.
Oh, that's Cajun.
Right,
Blood
it's
Buddha.
Cajun. And
Yeah.
So, I don't want to gross everybody out here, but realistically, I don't think you can get 100% of blood out of
Okay,
flesh.
here's the thing.
I really don't think
Here we go.
Maddie
I've heard
showed
this.
me, okay, Maddie, after she studied food science, biology, in her biology degree, she said, Mama, when you get a rare steak and it's oozing the red liquid, that's not blood.
That's not blood.
That is, what do they call it, myoglobin, and it's a cellular breakdown. So it's
That sounds like a rock song that stuck in my head.
No, it's not. It's not
It's
the
not.
blood.
It is a protein breakdown
And
at a
it's-
cellular level.
It's a fluid.
Yeah.
It happens to be red.
It's red, but it's not
but it's
blood.
not blood. No.
Y'all going to turn me into a rabbi here. I'm going to go, I don't know. I mean, technically.
But the point is that they're.
But that
you know,
bugged me for a while. It's
Eating,
like, should I have
eating the
it?
blood is something you have to actually want to do. You have to,
Yeah.
you know,
It,
Kind of like that
comes,
tribe in
You
Africa
save it
that
for
drinks
something.
milk
You
and
know.
and beef blood. The
You
tribe
save
in
it.
Africa that
Right,
does that.
right.
Oh, that's all they eat.
In other words, you shouldn't do that.
Was there a rare
Steak.
steak?
It's not blood. Yeah.
Because I kind of flip out.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Won't be me, I'll tell you that.
So, but here's the thing. So think about. Let's shift gear because I know people are really
Stuck on.
funny about diet. Now, just as a point, Deuteronomy 14. There are two places in the text which are very much what the Torah has to say about diet. Now you have other texts, but a couple of things that show up in the text. You have Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. And those tell you what is clean, what's not clean. So, the rule about the hoof and so forth. In aquatic life, anything that lives, this is the way I describe it, full-time or part-time in the water, has to have fins and scales. So, like Cajun cooking is,
Yeah, we're in deep.
it's bad here.
The rule of thumb, if you go to a function,
No.
don't eat a thing.
You're a little part-time in the
Eat
water.
Well, I
before
mean,
you
I'm
go.
part-time in the water too, but
Okay.
yeah. But it's but we're talking like so shrimp and catfish and everything that people love in this neck of the woods is off limits. So that part, people generally kind of get. Most people know about most of the prohibitions.
But what they don't realize is that, like shrimp, which is so important down here, that they're actually in the cockroach family.
Sure.
People don't realize that, and that what they eat for their diet is feces. So I said, okay, if that's
Shrimp?
what they're eating, are
think they
you
plankton.
eating it by extension? Where all your clean animals, whether
No,
it's
plankton
cows,
is-
goats, all right, chickens are debatable. Their primary source of diet is vegetarian. They eat grass, they eat herbs, they may eat a few little bugs here and there, but their primary diet is,
If
is
they're
vegetarian.
raised,
If they're raised,
pastured,
but
yeah.
if they're not raised correctly, then we
Not,
find
then they're
diseases.
GMO.
Anthrax,
Right.
that came from feeding lambs, sheep,
Anthrax.
their own kind.
Yeah.
Anthrax.
Yeah. There
That's the
will
stuff they
actually
put in envelopes and sent to politicians.
But back in the 1800s, or 1700s, when the disease first originated, it originated because farmers, whether it was famine or whether it was trying to save a penny, would feed them their own kind or parts of their own kind to save money or wither the famine. And that's where the disease originated. Same thing, mad cow, feeding their own kind.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, my point is that the Torah says don't eat it. That's simple. We don't. It doesn't say why we shouldn't eat it. I'm not saying we shouldn't know why. I'm just saying
Right.
it's not.
Well, it's a good
It's
point you bring
okay.
up.
It's okay to know why.
Yeah.
But back to Ross's point that one time, what about monkeys?
Monkeys.
You said it chased down a monkey and ripped its arm off.
No,
You
but
can't
think
eat it
think
raw.
about the feet. What kind of beast, you have to think about does it have a split hoof? Does it chew the cud? So there are some things you look at and you go, it's a pretty simple system. Like all you have to do is look at the feet, like on a land animal. You look at the foot, however you want to define it, and you need to know a little bit about their diet methods. How do they eat? Do they chew the cud? Do they, whatever. So that's kind of simple, but to your point about why. So a lot of people, I've heard people say, yeah, but Ross, back then they didn't know how to cook pork enough to get the trichinosis or the worms out, and I always tell them, look, fire has been hot for a long time. Fire's always been hot. That's not it doesn't. We don't say that we keep these dietary rules necessarily because
That makes sense.
they make sense. And here's the other deal. When you go to a doctor, if you have heart problems or whatever, a lot of times they'll say you need to eliminate some of that red meat from your diet. And we go, yeah, but the Lord says I can eat red meat as long as it's okay, but you're eating it 7 times a day. You need to chill out a little bit. Eat a few green things. other than M&Ms. So there is this idea that you can have too much of an acceptable thing. And it doesn't...
Meat back then.
Do what, Dave?
So they didn't eat a lot of meat.
They didn't. That's right. They
As
didn't.
much as-
Mediterranean diets even now eat a lot of
It was easy
vegetables.
to get, huh?
Yeah.
Well, back then too, cattle were your income, they were your wealth.
Yeah.
So when you butchered an animal, you were taking part of your wealth and consuming it. So, I mean, yeah, you did it, but it was special occasions. It was, you know, not necessarily
One of
daily.
the toughest, as far as the simplicity of the rules of what you should eat and what you shouldn't eat, one of the toughest ones I've found is in my own study, is chicken. You know, It's- nobody really knows for sure. I mean, I don't
Yeah,
wanna step on
there are
people's
some
toes
debates.
here,
It is a foul.
but, it's bad. I mean, what's the Torah say
But
about
like
that?
Ross pointed out one time, there are no chickens running around out there in the desert.
So, you know, there are debates, and, you know, the bottom line is the rabbinic authorities have had these discussions for a long time, and there are still elements of these subjects that are debatable. Rav Kook is a famous rabbi who promoted vegetarianism, and there are plenty who do. Some of you may know Jeremy Gimpel. Jeremy's a friend of ours. He's come here and talked. He was a meat eater like so many others, and he, from what I remember, he started investigating the kosher slaughter. He's now vegan, like extreme vegan. Now, I'm not here today to say, well, you ought to do this, or you shouldn't eat this, or you shouldn't. But if a person chooses to participate in the eating of meat, the Torah does govern that. And the point is, how do we best apply these things to our life? Before I knew that Torah mattered, I ate all sorts of unclean things. I mean, I grew up in it. We ate pork, and I enjoyed the hell out of it, honestly.
You fought forever with pepperoni.
Yeah, I didn't even want to look. I mean, don't ask, don't tell with pepperoni. It was a while, and I knew, but I was like, well, they call it pepperoni. I mean, what's pepperoni? What's a pepperoni?
Dave, in the beginning, when we discovered the dietary laws, he would just really mess. He'd read every label. It's like, oh, you know, you can't eat that.
Yeah.
There's gelatin in it. You know.
Can't say I don't know.
Don't
Yeah.
eat those breath mints. I got you.
Yeah.
Although I will say, if you accidentally mess up, I lived next to a gal who worked for a chemical company that produced the meat for Taco Bell, Pizza
Oh,
Hut,
that ain't me.
and I don't remember if it was Wendy's. And so I said, okay, so how much is an actual meat content and how much is chemical? She says, well, you
Not
know,
much.
can't tell you. I said, okay, is it less than 80%? Oh, yeah. I said, less than 85%? Oh, yeah. Less than, it came to the point where only like 10% of it is actual meat.
Yeah.
The rest of it is chemically engineered meat. So
Maybe like soy products or something.
she didn't say. She
Well,
Didn't
and
ask either.
yeah, don't ask,
don't wanna
don't
know.
What's a
tell.
veggie sausage?
Yeah.
it's easier for me. It became easier for me when I would overeat. I tell people when I would overeat because I'm a good cook and I live with a good cook, but I would generally overeat meat and gravy, like red meat. I was already eating kosher, but so in order for me to work on my genetic, you have what you have for genetics. And in my genetic history, my dad, who's passed away, was not in the best health, and he had diabetes and heart problems. And so I'm predisposed to certain things already, so I'm kind of fighting an uphill battle. So I wanted to do everything that I could control. So take that at your own personal place. Wherever I'm not judging, but I would encourage people to find what works best for you. And if you do eat meat, then, seek to live. Now, there are some in the Jewish community and in the Torah faith community that would say, look, you're not a Jew, you can eat whatever you want. Well, I kind of think, my thought, based on a plain reading of the text, is that if Israel's job is to bring this document and these instructions to the world, then, you know, I'm not saying you have to do everything like Israel, but the Torah, the instructions are the instructions, and God probably knows best about what's good for you. So it really comes down to that. So, but some would say you can eat unclean foods if you choose. I don't say that, but I know people that I love and care for who do eat unclean foods. And I don't, like if I go on a business meeting or something and I'm sitting with someone and I don't go, oh man, you can't eat that, you know. I don't eat it, but I don't tell them, I mean, unless they ask.
Within Deuteronomy, the prescriptions for how to eat are all things equal in Deuteronomy?
I don't know what you're asking.
Well, we have other commandments, other laws. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not steal. Keep holy the Sabbath. Place number. Those, to me, would seem to be a hierarchical level above food laws. You follow what I'm saying?
I do follow what you're saying. I'm just waiting. I'm making sure you're finished.
Is everything equal?
So the rabbinic authority, just to kind of answer the question this way, the rabbis put this point forward. It doesn't usually provide a ranking, you know, throughout the text that says this one's more important than this one, and so one of the points that they make, which is pretty wise, is try your best to follow in principle the teaching, all the teaching. If you come across something, it's something you get. Like I understand the difference between this and this. Apply it to your life because you don't know, this is the way they put it, you don't know the reward for doing that. You know, it could seem insignificant or inexplicable, but you don't know. You don't know how important it is to you. His ways are higher than your ways. His thoughts are your thoughts. Now, in the Second Temple period, one of the things that the rabbinic community had a problem with is that the menim, what they would call the heretics, primarily Jewish Christians, put a lot more emphasis on the 10 words. And so there was a big rift there because they didn't want anybody to think in terms of this one's more important than this one and so forth. So I would just say, in my understanding, the 10 things, as we've called them in our culture, the 10 commandments, those 10 matters are 10 fundamental, these things God wrote with his finger on 2 tablets of stone. They were put into the ark. This is the Edud, it's called. This is, God's finger wrote this. Now, you would be led to think these are the big, and they are. They're fundamental and foundational and bedrock for society, for culture to flourish and to function. I mean, take out any one of those and you... Now, these other rules, statutes, judgments, you know, all of these different elements that comprise what we call Torah, instruction, they too are important. But as you pointed out, some of them are applicable in certain places to certain people and not others. And so there are things that have to do with the priesthood, have nothing to do with me. In principle, though, I can keep some of those things. The example I give, we're coming up on Yom HaKippurim. Yom Kippur, there are rules. Take Leviticus 16. It deals with what the high priest has to do. Now, first of all, it has to be done in the place that I'll put my name and all that kind of. Now, those things that have to do with the high priest, nothing to do with. But you know what else it says? To make yourself low on that day. Now, does that mean to fast? I can get into those kind of discussions. But there are things that I can apply to my own life, and I don't worry so much about the things that don't apply to me. There are rules for women that don't apply to me, rules for the king. But in principle, now, to your question about are some more important than others, I'm not so sure that there's not a little bit of wisdom in saying if they're divine in origin,
They're probably the most important.
Yeah.
In other words, there's of the.
Yeah.
What's
Go
the
ahead.
greatest commandment?
The greatest commandment is this, and the second is.
Like unto it.
But interesting you bring that up because the 10 words can be viewed as those which deal with our relationship with God as major heading points and those which deal with our relationship with man. And Joe Dell often brings up that Dennis Prager does some good work on the 10 words, the 10 commandments. He's got some nice videos that talk about the benefit of these things to the entire world. I mean, you know, if the world at large honored father and mother, that would be a wonderful thing, right? I mean, I can't see where someone, now I know that there are some who would say, well, you don't have to worry about that. You're not an Israelite.
But if the
Yeah.
world honored the
That too.
10 matters, we
Yeah,
wouldn't have a problem.
yep.
I got a question about how to discern whether I'm doing something that seems right in my own eyes versus maybe some of these commandments and statutes. I come across them as I'm reading, and I pray, you know, like maybe I'm feeling convicted in one of these areas that I'm not doing it, or I should be doing something differently. Is that doing it according to my own, it seems right in my eyes, or, you know, do you understand what I'm saying?
Can I add to that question? Well, not answering it, because
Yeah.
I don't want to, I just want to add to it. I have some notes in here about, there's a verse about doing right in your own eyes, and the way of the fool according to counsel. I don't remember the verse reference,
Yeah.
I didn't write it down, but the counsel part was my question. It goes along
Where's that
with it.
come from, you mean?
Yeah, and in other words, the point of doing right with your own eyes versus counsel, and it went along also with the kings of the day. Some didn't do right; they were evil.
Mm-hmm.
And my thoughts were that, you know, when the king was not evil and did right according to God, then the people had correct counsel. So
He would set the example by his.
so
I'm not
that's
sure.
it, you know.
I'm not sure I quite got.
So let's say the dietary laws and things, and you know, things that you shouldn't do. Well, that's pretty clear, but there may be some areas where, like, if I'm going to eat meat, should I only eat grass-fed beef? Should I only? If I'm praying and I'm asking for guidance in these minutia areas, you know, because it's, I guess I'm trying not to complicate it. Is it wrong to say, I will, if I feel that Jehovah is leading me according to this, that I should do this or not do this? I guess it's I'm not making it clear. I know when I first came into this walk, there were certain things like, at some point, the thought of pork, the thought of eating pork would make me physically ill. And I felt like that was Jehovah giving me this help to walk in his ways. Is that wrong to say I'm gonna try to keep the Torah to my best ability, the way it seems right in my mind, until he guides me otherwise?
I understand what you're saying now. I don't think you're doing that. I don't think you're saying, well, I'm just going to keep doing it the best way I can. I think what you're doing is more close to what we're talking about today than you think, because you're seeking counsel, to Dave's point, from the Word. So you're going to Scripture, you're meditating on these things, and you're saying, how do I do this? I mean, I'm not going to suggest that you're going to get sick if you do something wrong, or that you're going to immediately, you know, like come down with some plague because you violate. You're not going to get smitten with leprosy because you didn't. That's not the way God works in this.
I guess that's what I'm asking, is that can we trust Jehovah? Is it right to say I'm going to trust Jehovah?
Well, let me
to lead me in a better walk, a deeper walk.
Absolutely.
And until that happens,
So-
if I'm doing something wrong, I just have to trust that he's going to correct
And
me.
I think that so many of us have grown up with these arbitrary ideas of God, and it really comes down to, is he righteous? If you are trying with all your heart and you are seeking him, would he be righteous then to provide correction when you're doing the best you can? You know, and I think that's where we do have to trust that he is a righteous God, and he is not going to. One of the chapters in my book goes through the mercy of Jehovah. You know, everybody claims he's this harsh, exacting God. You know, the Old Testament God shows no mercy. But when you compare the mercy, I mean, Israel rebelled 10 times in the wilderness. I mean, you look at what humanity did, what he put up with throughout the kingdom years, over and over and over again. It is the definition of mercy over and over again. So I think that we can trust that he can deal mercifully with us as well.
One thing to add to that, and to kind of maybe shed a little light on your question too, is, and I taught on this at the conference, in 2 Chronicles 30, the people are trying to keep the Passover. But some of them weren't sanctified, right? So one of the things that it says there is that Hezekiah, who is a righteous king, knows that. And he says in 2 Chronicles 30, verse 18, Hezekiah prayed for them, saying, the good Jehovah pardon everyone who directs his heart to seek God, Adonai Jehovah of his fathers, though he be not cleansed according to the purification of the sanctuary. Next verse. And Jehovah hearkened to Hezekiah and healed the people. So we do have to trust that God is righteous and that he is going to honor our efforts. Even when we may not be living exactly, we may not be doing but that's not a license to be lazy.
No.
But it's a good feeling to know that God will meet us in that sense, if that makes sense.
Does that mean, does that translate that when I'm trying, God loves me? Does God love me? Or does he, you know what I'm saying? It's like,
He's sitting there shaking
Of
his
course
head going,
he- of
gosh,
course he
Sherry,
does.
again.
well, yeah, okay,
Of course he does.
see, the more I read in the Torah, it's like, I know Deuteronomy talks about, you know, the long suffering and the loving kindness. And you touched on this. It's like God's love is conditional.
Yeah.
And I guess lately I've been thinking more of that. Like, well, do you love me?
Well, people
Do you love me?
people can beat themselves up, and they can live in a constant state of fear and oh, am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? You know, and Deuteronomy 9 talks about, look, it's not your righteousness that does this, and this. It's God's love, and so his mercy outweighs his justice is the way that people come away with. But it's not a license for lax behavior. We have to do our best to live accordingly. It's not enough to just go, well, I love God and I'm doing my best. And you're like, are you really doing your best? Or are you, because a lot of people say that, oh, I love God, I'm doing the best I can. You're like, well, are you seeking to follow his ways? Well, you don't have to do all that. God doesn't. That's a totally different thing. What you're doing is you're looking at these texts and you're going, I'm trying to apply these. Am I doing it enough? None of us probably are technically. But we still strive for that.
He gave us judgment, just like he judges. In other words, of those laws,
I got to plug this in.
Okay.
I'm listening.
Of everything that's in Deuteronomy, you have things that address how we are to treat the Creator. There are things on how we are dressed, how we treat each other, and then there are things of how we treat ourselves, albeit the guidance provided in what to eat. Now, obviously he couldn't cover everything, because if he could, he probably would have said, no, look, no smoking. And they would have gone like, What?
What's
Yeah.
No heroin.
We did.
What's heroin?
Yeah.
You know, I couldn't cover anything, but so you have to make the judgments based upon the guidance provided of what's right and what's wrong. I don't see how you could expect him to tell you everything.
I
Just
think
like you couldn't tell one of your kids everything. You have to give them the guidance to make that decision of what's right and wrong.
Yeah. And I think we have a general direction on most things. You know, if someone, the camp that says, I'm doing what's right in my own eyes, that we talked about, passages from Proverbs and, you know, and Judges 17, Judges 21, Deuteronomy 12, I mean, that group is someone who's not, the way the Bible defines that's a rebellious, I'm going to do it my own way. It's not someone going, I'm trying to do it, but I might not be doing it enough, or I'm not doing it well enough. No, that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about someone who openly rebels and says, I did it my way. Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
The reason I always hated that
my
song.
judgment, in my judgment, I'm doing it right.
Yeah. I don't need, you're not the boss of me. That's what we're talking about.
In my judgment, I'm doing it right.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what Jehovah's judgment is.
Yeah.
It's
That's right.
Your talk this morning pretty much got me to read the whole
Boss
chapter
of
of
me.
Job.
That's what we're talking
What
about.
do you got to?
I was trying to pull it up since I put.
So reading Job, I mean, he's a perfect man, and things didn't go well with him, and his friends pointed his finger and said, aha, you're not perfect. So, you know, so judgmental, we can't be judgmental because bad things are going to happen to good people.
Yeah.
That's the truth of the matter. And so we can't really say, well, if something's going bad, it must be something wrong. I must be doing something wrong. So that takes away. So with that knowledge, if you say, no matter how, could be perfect, and still things could happen.
Yeah.
So Sherry, it's a guilt thing when you think, oh, I got to do everything right. I got to do everything right. You should have to try to do everything right.
Yeah.
But you can. And counsel is important, which leads to the people who are in charge. Who is this counsel? So
And remember, too, when God passed before Moses and he tells him his character.
Yeah, Exodus
The
34.
essence of his character is loving kindness.
Sure.
And that's a type of loving kindness that is attributed to no one and nothing else, only to Jehovah himself. It's like it's so deep and so pure that it's there. And I think we can trust in that.
in the long run, sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, when we're seeking him and we're doing, you know, we can't live by somebody else's judgments. We can't live by what somebody else believes. We are each seeking and finding, and until Jehovah says, thus says Jehovah, and he gathers us to him, and we know, and we're all on the same page, you know, say 99% of, you know, whatever, we do have to seek him for ourselves.
And I think most of the people, I'd say most of the people who are orienting themselves to God and his way, they've made a lot of strides. I mean, they are working towards that goal. And like 2 Chronicles 30 is a great example where those who incline their hearts to God to try to live according to his way, you know, that's part of it. Again, that's not the contrast I was talking about, somebody who tries, and because we have passages, though the righteous stumbles, you know, 7 times, whatever. So the idea is that a person can make mistakes and will make mistakes, and they simply dust themselves off, get themselves up, and they walk and they get back on the path. We're not saying that perfect means without any error. What we're saying is perfect means complete and whole and oriented in the right direction, and you're seeking to live your life according to God's ways, and yeah, you make a mistake here and there.
To be a perfect man or human, you'd have to make mistakes.
You can't
it's
learn.
Like, we're not God.
And I don't expect all men to be as perfect as me, you, and John.
That's right.
You know? I mean, I just don't. But
sorry.
And I'm beginning to wonder about you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I,
Yeah. So, yeah, being perfect doesn't mean we're God. That's pretty much the problem.
So one of the
Well,
questions
yeah,
in my mind from Deuteronomy
Right, you have to be
and
careful
the
that you don't
laws
become
was the patriarch
self-righteous. Yeah,
Like,
because
for
God
instance,
will take you down a
Abraham.
couple notches.
was a righteous man. He didn't have all this. How did he do that? Did God just say, look, I'm giving you a sneak preview. I got these things I'm going to bring up later. It's called the 10 words, okay? And did he? I don't know.
I don't know, I think Abram had quite a bit because it says when he left Mesopotamia. I mean, God, there's not one passage in all of Genesis or anywhere in the Torah that says that God gave Abram the Torah. But then you
I'm not
find
talking about the Torah. I'm talking about just giving him the insight. Was it if Abraham or Noah were righteous, and that's what it says in the scriptures? Did God impart to them the knowledge of what it takes to be righteous?
well,
or
but
how
it
did that
says
work,
it
actually?
says that Abram had Jehovah's statutes, his judgments, his laws, and his commands.
Job predates
So-
all that.
He just didn't
Yeah.
write them down.
Just didn't write them down.
the question becomes, was it, and this is what people debate, did it include, you should not muzzle an ox, was it all that?
To what degree?
To what degree was it, don't give a dog a chicken bone? I mean, what were the rules that he
Since
followed?
none of that was written down, would have to be the nature of his heart.
Do we know that it wasn't written down? Can we even say that it
Well,
wasn't?
we don't know that it was, but we don't know that it wasn't, but it certainly doesn't say that it was. But was it? So the rabbis clearly do say that. They say, "Oh no, it's clear. It's not in the text."
Written
But
430 years after?
well, what they'll do is they'll say, and Adam taught it to Seth, and Seth taught it to this, and this one taught it to this one, and this one, and then they had a Torah school in a cave.
Well, and here's the interesting thing. When you study the genealogy goes from Adam to Methuselah to Noah to Abraham. You have 4 generations from the Garden of Eden that lived for truth to be known among many people. Shem lived through the life of all the patriarchs. He lived through Abram, he lived through Isaac, and he died when I think Jacob and Esau were 15. I think it was 15 years of age. It might have been 50, but 15 years of age. So, I mean, Shem was alive for all of Abram's life, or most of Abram's life. So there was a great interaction. I mean, we because we have an isolated story, we think that communication was isolated. I
But
don't know that it was.
here's something, just so you go ahead, Dave.
No, yeah, I'm gonna be real quick. I raised my children, but I didn't teach them everything. I didn't teach them every little detail about everything. But to this day, I still say you ought to know better than that.
Yeah.
That's the way I raised you.
Yeah, you
ought
got to
know
make
better than
decisions.
that.
Yeah.
So it's
We didn't cover that subject.
So
but you should know better.
but you should know better than that.
That's
That's
right.
right and wrong. That's
We get throughout the text little clues that things have, in some ways, been revealed progressively, but based on some consistency.
Barry, our friend Barry would really talk about that.
Yeah. So if you look at like Deuteronomy 5:1 says, "And Moses called all Israel and said to them, Hear, O Israel, the statutes and judgments which I speak in your ears this day, that you may learn them and guard them and do them. Jehovah our God made a covenant with us in Horeb. Jehovah made not this covenant with our fathers, but with us, even us, who are all of us here alive this day." So there is this idea that at certain times in the progressive revelation, it's not like it's a drastic, like, oh, I never saw that one coming, because we have clues like in the story of the ark, in the story of Noah in the early chapters of Genesis, where it says that he was aware of clean and unclean. But there's nowhere prior to that where it goes, and these animals shall be, that's Leviticus 11, that's Deuteronomy 14. But did he know, certain concepts, certain rules and regulations and judgments and statutes? And so anyway, these are probably above our pay grade, some of these questions, but it is good to consider these things. But we now have the Hebrew Bible, and I think our main goal ought to be, and I think it is for us, to seek to live our lives according to the way as best we understand it, and knowing that when there are situations where we fail or that we don't achieve, what we're striving for, that God does look at the heart. We tend to judge our neighbors harder probably in some situations than God does. One time I got in trouble as a young leader in a civilian occupation where I was being too strict on some employees according to my boss. I didn't think I was because I had the rule. And what he told me really stuck with me. He said, you look at yourself according to your intentions, but you don't give them that grace. You're looking at them according to their actions. And I said, that's not fair. And he said, but it's true. He said, go home and think about it. And I did think about it. And you know what? He was right. Because we tend to think, well, I meant to do this, and I give myself a pass. But when someone else did the slightest thing, we tend to go, you just. So the idea is that we ought to kind of reverse that, if nothing else. Give other people the pass and judge ourselves pretty strictly, like you're doing. I mean, it is. I think that's fair for us to go, Jehovah, am I really doing this right? Help me open my eyes, open my ears, give me an understanding heart. But don't fret over it to the point where you're like, I don't know, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know. I just sit here.
I see things at work and my staff, and I'm like, I start out with this, they should know, and then I think, and have I not made the same mistake before? It's okay, back off. That's when you were talking about the leaders of the churches and things like that, and I'm seeing this so much more now as I hear from my friends that when somebody posted, when the church feels it must become like the world to win the world.
Yeah.
It has not won the world has won it.
That is so true.
I have such a terror in my heart for these leaders who are pushing this, that I'm thinking, I feel sorry for the people that are following the sheep, but oh my gosh.
Gosh, even
The
to the
leaders
point
who
where
are-
they
who are-
hire marketing companies to know how to market their message
Yeah.
best.
Well, that's my point. When the leaders are like that, when the leaders are messed up, the people have to do what's right in their own eyes.
And I'm seeing more in my friends who are posting on Facebook saying, you don't need them. You need the Bible. Don't listen to the church. Read your Bible. And I'm blown away. I'm like, oh, wow.
Like Jodelle said last night, we were talking, and she said, check but believe but verify, or something like that. So if somebody's talking and they're offering their understanding of something, okay, I'll listen, because you could very well have an insight that I need. But if you do provide me with some insight from your perspective, I'm going to consider it, and I'll weigh it, and I'll consider it heavily with some. But I always verify, look it up. So.
Well, I like to read other people's, I like to read this perspective and that perspective, and and then take it back to the Bible, and is that in line?
Yep.
And yeah, I've gotten myself in trouble with that, but it's okay.
So today we talked about a lot. We covered a lot of points that I think can benefit each of us. And we do the same thing every Saturday. Hopefully it has helped you. And we really appreciate people's time. I know I do. The local group that drove in from all over. And thank you for coming in, Jodelle. And I really did not mention Lydia because she was sitting over there, and I had to call her now and make sure she's okay because I didn't know. Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
child.
But anyway, so she drove in, and your time is valuable. I've learned that, and so people who listen in, who drive in, it means a lot to us, but also we appreciate it. So please know that we appreciate you. Have a beautiful week. Have a blessed week. Mm-hmm. Seek to live your life according to the way by doing what is right in the eyes of Jehovah, as you can discern from Scripture. And, join us next week. We'll be back. The goal is to be back. Same time, same channel. We'll tell you about the movie. John's going to pop some popcorn. I wish you could be here.
We had smell-o-vision. We could have popped it.
There you go.
Boy,
That's
we
right.
could get 'em in that way.
So Shabbat Shalom, Shavua Tov. Have a good day.
Hey, y'all.